I made a game in 14 days. And it's still kind of weird for me to like say that out loud, but I actually did it. Now, as somebody with barely any coding experience and somebody with even less game design experience, I just kind of jumped in. I dived in head first. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing. And I made Tiny Taps, a little puzzle platformer where the only way to jump is to fall. Now, there's lots of spikes, there's lots of death. It's definitely one of those games. So how did I come up with all this? How did I come up with the idea? How did I just go through with it? How did I actually make a video game? I have wanted to make a game since I was 6, and I'm 32 now, which we're just gonna not talk about. Now, I remember being just a little kid, and it was around Christmas that I got an N64. But I can vividly remember playing Banjo-Kazooie, just sitting on the floor, a couple inches in front of the TV. I've got the N64 controller, and I am just pecking the crap out of these jumping vegetables, and there was something so enjoyable about that. Of course, as a 6-year-old, I was horrible at this game, but I still tried my best, and I loved every second of it. But it was this experience that made me fall in love with games. There was something about it that I just loved. Movies couldn't replicate it. Books absolutely couldn't replicate it. But video games were wonderful. So I became absolutely obsessed from the age of 6. Jump 10 years into the future, and your boy gets a copy of Game Maker 8. I can't remember how I got the book, but The Game Maker's Apprentice, Game Development for Beginners, landed on my desk. It's a book written by Jacob Habgood and Mark Overmars, the former being the guy who spearheaded the Game Maker software. And this book was a dream come true for me, because not only did it go through a game-making software, but it also showed off, I think, 9 examples of different games you could make. Don't get me wrong here, these games were atrocious. None of them were actually that cool. I remember there was one with a dragon, and you just kind of moved him like up and down on the screen, and you would shoot fireballs. It was terrible, but I was able to make a character move, and that was pretty cool. But my adolescent brain could not handle the logic of game programming, and to be honest, I just really wanted to play World of Warcraft, so I put the software aside and I started playing WoW. Now, this is probably not going to come as a surprise to anybody watching this video, but I'm not a programmer. I've done some web development. I have some foundational experience with booleans, variables, arrays, dictionaries, all that good stuff, but to say that I'm confident in it is to say that I am confident enough that I could jump to the moon if I tried. Needless to say, every time I jumped into a game engine, I was just always frustrated, even if it was the visual ones. That was until I found Construct 3. Construct 3 uses a visual code editor, and as someone who has leaned more towards the artistic side of things, this just kind of clicked in my brain. Staring at lines of code is just kind of like looking at piles of spaghetti to me. However, looking at packages and like icons clicks in my brain. I don't know, man. That's where I was at 15 days ago. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to make a game, and I said, you know what? I've got Construct 3. Let's just see what I can do with it. I did their little tutorial, and it's nothing special. You just make this little top-down shooter thing, and it's a wizard now, and you're like shooting fireballs and stuff. It's pretty cool. It's super basic, but it's good enough to get comfortable with the editor, and I felt good enough to make a full game from there. So let's start with day 1 of working on Tiny Taps. Day 1 of working on the game was actually pretty easy. I had a blank slate as to what I could do, and all I wanted to do was make a single mechanic. That's it. I wanted to make one mechanic that the entirety of this mini game could revolve around. So I threw a character into the editor, I made some platforms, I started bouncing around, and I was like, what would be cool? I thought by twisting the mechanic of spikes doing damage to you as a negative thing, them doing damage to you as a positive thing might be kind of cool. Of course, I still didn't really know what I was doing. I was using Construct's built-in behaviors to make my character move, and I was trying to figure out how to make him bounce if he hit something, and I eventually got it. So by the end of day 1, I actually had a prototype level where I could go from a spot, jump into some spikes, bounce into another platform. Hey, there you go, bam, single mechanic. At this point, I was feeling pretty good. I was like, wow, day 1 and I've already got my mechanic nailed down. I'm pretty great. But then day 2 happened. As day 2 started, I knew that I wanted to document what I was doing. I wrote down, nailed down, mechanic. It's true, I did nail down the mechanic, but it's not because it was the mechanic from day 1. It was completely different. So I ended up scrapping the spikes. I couldn't get it to a point where it felt good to bounce on them because it was just this visceral reaction of, oh, spikes, So that's when I decided to divert that mechanic into a single jump. And that single jump can only be achieved if you're falling. But it didn't take me long until I had a working prototype where I could jump through the level, I'd have to fall down, and then I could bounce up. Very similar to what Solgren had done with his game, except you couldn't jump from the floor. You could only jump if you had fallen.
I've fallen, and I can't get up!
And this felt good. Now, it felt a little weird at first, and that's because I was still trying to get down the mechanics, because I was trying to also set up a camera, because it was following the player originally, because the levels were going to be bigger. I learned a lot, let me just say that, and I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning because I didn't understand what I was doing, and they come to bite me in the butt. But for right now, day 2, I had nailed down my mechanic, and I was like, wow, day 2? And I've still got how many more days left? Day 3 ended up being an extremely productive day. After I had kind of gotten a prototype down, I went to Itch, I grabbed some assets, I found things that I liked, and I started to paint in the world a little bit. And this is when I was doing player animations, and this was really foreign to me. Out of everything, animations and like tiling became the hardest for me. I don't know why, because they're really easy now that I look back in hindsight, but at the moment, understanding it was rough. Now, especially the animations. As I was trying to switch between animations, this is where I was finding myself struggling because I would get stuck in a jump state or I wouldn't go back to idle, and it was just this constant iteration of going back into my event sheet and looking at it and going, oh, that's why. And it was good because I did force myself to look at my mistakes and logically have to come up with an answer for it, which was a little bit harder than I thought it would be, considering the fact that even though Construct 3 has great documentation, it has a great and pretty active forum, I still had so much trouble finding the answers to what I needed. But day 3, while productive, came with a slew of doubts. Every time I had tried to work on a game, program a game, whatever, I always got to that point where I had this crippling anxiety. If I code this in, and when it breaks, I don't think I can fix it. Even if I know how to search it well enough, I just don't think I can. And I was constantly clouded with these doubts, with these fears, but this time I was determined. I just couldn't put it down. I had started a challenge, I was only a few days in, and I said, you know what? I'm not gonna get burnout. I'm not gonna let myself get frustrated. I'm just gonna do it. And that's what I did. And surprisingly, it kind of worked. What started out as a mishmash of ideas was slowly turning into a game. I added a tile set from the Pixel Frog pack, I changed the goal to a chest, I added a suck power to the chest, which eventually got removed, added a fade in and out on death, changed the collectible to a skull, changed the fruits to be apples, reduced spike size by 50%, and made the skulls grayed out unless the player collected all the fruit. And that's not even all that I did, because it was time for the tile map. Now, I hope somebody else can relate to me on this, but I had so many issues just understanding how tile maps worked for some reason. I don't know why. Like, I pulled it in and I figured out the grid size, but when I started to like paint it in and like the little corners and all these little weird intricacies, it was so confusing at first. Now, after a few hours, I did start to get it. It was making sense. I understood it. It was starting to flow better. But in the beginning, oh my gosh, it took me forever just to make a layout that looked semi-nice. But I got it at the end of the day. Day 5 started with the crushing weight of game development. This was really the first day that I felt it because there was so much to do. And I was just feeling it, man, because it was like every single thing I did was like a mountain that I had to climb. I'm not sure if that's just because I was so new to it, but I had so much trouble just understanding how to do this efficiently. And that wasn't even the worst part of it, because day 5 also showed me just how bad my management system is. If you don't start organizing your stuff, it becomes a chaos, man. It becomes a mess. It's horrible. And even in Construct 3, where everything is labeled pretty well, I was already starting to feel the clutter. My main event sheet just had all this random code from the player, from the fruits, from the jumping, from the solids, from everything. It was just cluttered, and it was becoming really difficult for me to change things and keep track of things. So, with a little bit of coding experience, I took all of my player code out of the main sheet and I put it in it separate, and then I just included that in the main file. I did a little bit with JavaScript on some projects, and it was really nice to be able to declutter that. Day 6 started with a bug. There was an awful bug that messed with the player's spawn on level 13, as well as a layering issue between the jump particle and the fruit being picked up. But while the main game was shaping up and getting fixed, there was something seriously lacking. A main menu and an ending scene. With a scene transition coded in, I needed to make a main menu, and for whatever reason, main menus are a pain in the butt. I don't know why they are, but it's like coding the player's movement is so much more enjoyable than making an arrow move up and down on a menu. I don't know, man. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's the squirrel brain in me. I don't know, but it was just a hellacious experience to get that puppy going. But I did get her going, and again, Vimlark. Whew, huge props to Vimlark because that dude helped me so much. Rock Smasher tutorial. If you're new to Construct, watch that. It'll help you so much. But this main menu is really where I learned how to efficiently use my booleans to check states and to trigger things. So it was a good learning experience, but it was also extremely frustrating. And also at this time, I was learning how to use timers. I was learning how to use a manager object to keep track throughout the levels, to fire off timers, to keep track of certain global variables and things like that. So I was really stepping into a new spot in game development that I had never gotten to. The fact that I was actually using things that you're supposed to use was kind of foreign to me, not gonna lie. Even though day 6 had a lot of progress, I found myself getting sidetracked because making a chest animation is so much more fun than ironing out a janky jump animation. Until this point, I'd been testing my game with the arrow keys on my keyboard. So I plugged in my PS5 controller and I went to work adding gamepad support. And there's just something that is so satisfying about using a controller with a game that you've made. At this point in the game's development, I really wanted to start adding sounds. And this was really fun for me. As somebody who does music full-time and professionally, sound design is just so fun to me. I went through Itch, I went through some other pages. I started to find these like PS2 Game Boy sounds, and I started to mash them up together to make these unique sounds. However, at the end of this day, I realized that while the game is shaping up, while the game is feeling good, there was a huge problem, and it's the fact that there was no saving of any kind. So if you went through all the levels, if you got all the skulls, if you did everything, it just reset, and that is not fun. The game in its current state was this: a pixel precision puzzle platformer where the only way you can jump is by first falling. 20 levels, 3 unlockable characters, and a collectible in each level. Well, if any of that wanted to be saved, I actually had to learn how to make a save system, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I really didn't want to because I knew it was gonna be frustrating. However, Construct 3 has a save feature built in, and I was like, whoa man, this is great. All of my woes, all of my issues will be gone. And they weren't, because Construct's save system is trash. I'm sorry, it's so bad. It's literally just a snapshot. It's like a save state. So it'll save your current position and all of that good stuff, but it's literally just a save state. And that just didn't work because I needed to keep track of the skulls, I needed to keep track of the levels, and it was becoming clear that I had to look for a more in-depth way to do this. And that is with local storage. I found this great video that was a masterclass in local storage. Absolutely watch that if you need to understand it. And I went to town, man. Does this mean that I was met with success immediately? Oh, heck no. I spent hours of failed saving, failed loading, going into the debug mode to just watch things and not track and not count and then disappear when I relaunched the game. It was atrocious, man. I was so frustrated. There were so many moments where I was just like, you know what? Screw the collectibles, screw the unlockables. I'm done. I'm not doing this. I remember at that point, I put the game down and I left. I left it for a few hours and I was like, I need a break. I need a break. I'm not doing this crap anymore. Well, I came back a couple hours later and somehow it just kind of started to click. I don't know, man, maybe I just needed the break. You know, when you get to that point where you're banging your head against the wall, that's the point where you're just not gonna make progress. So once I let myself cool down, I simplified it and I actually looked at what I was doing and I didn't try to rush through it. And it started working. I couldn't believe it, man. Stuff was actually saving. Stuff was actually loading. I could go and get all the skulls, and when I reloaded, it was there. It was awesome. It felt so satisfying to finish that. And that was a great way to end this day. With saving and loading finally working, I started my day off easy by adding a secret character. I updated the pause menu that I didn't tell you about with a better one. I added a logo with a custom sound effect and updated the font to something a little nicer. And the game was finally starting to feel like a game. I was play testing it constantly, blasting through all the levels, collecting all the skulls, and it felt good, man. There was a couple of issues that I knew right off the bat. One that was so strange to me was there was a 1 out of 10 chance that every time you got to the edge of a platform and you were going to fall and then jump, it just wouldn't register your jump and you would fall right into the spikes. With how high I had the gravity, it was really frustrating. So I started to design my levels around the failing mechanic, and this, we'll talk about that one later. But I knew from all the game dev videos that I'd watched, from people that I had talked to that had made games, I really needed to get somebody to playtest this, because while it is good to me in its current state, it's also been with me since its inception, and I'm probably a little bit blinded to the rough edges. But even with a little bit of jank, everything was working, and my final thing on this day was that I added a little flippy jump for whenever you actually jumped, and it just, it felt so nice. By day 10, I was officially feeling the burnout. It was so much work for such a simple game, with a lot of the superfluous stuff that I was doing, like adding a tutorial that was not even needed and that I scrapped even though I had spent hours on it. All these little things were just starting to pile up, and I was just really feeling like I was going in circles. Now, one of the big changes that I actually made this day was I added a line of sight system to the fruit. So whenever you would get close enough, it would like latch onto the player, and that felt pretty good. But day 10 in general really was just a not very productive day. As day 11 started, the burnout was still there, but I was excited because today I was going to actually let somebody playtest the game. I was going to meet a friend later, he was going to play it, and it was going to be good. However, when I watched him play it, I only watched him get frustrated. I only watched him not have a good time. I only watched him die repeatedly to bad coding, especially that jump, which was becoming more of like a 7 out of 10 chance instead of 1 out of 10 chance on the ledge. I had to go back and I had to really look at my game and figure out how could I fix this? And that was daunting. It was really daunting, because if I wanted to fix the player's movement code, which I really needed to, I'd have to redo it all completely. And again, it's a very short game, it's a very simple game, but that was still something that I wasn't sure how to do. With the negative feedback, with the lackluster response, I was really feeling really depressed. Man, it was so disheartening. It was just so disheartening to see that. And I went back, I looked at the game, and I was just like, man, this sucks. I don't want to do this. To say that this day ended on a high note would be the biggest lie of the century. On day 12, I opened up the game and I just kind of stared at it for an hour. I tried to figure out how I could fix the player's code, how I could make the jump better, how I could make the movement better, and honestly, I had no ideas. The only idea that I came up with after having no ideas was to delete everything. And by that I mean the player's movement code. The player had nothing at this point, and that's pretty much 2 weeks worth of work down the drain. I didn't just disable it, I literally deleted it, and that was such a bad move. That's such a bad move, because if I felt there was no hope before, it was crazy, man. Just looking at my character, trying to make the jump work again, and not knowing what I was doing. I was ready to scrap this video, I was ready to scrap this game, and I was ready to just go and lay down and take a nice depression nap. At this point, I was so desperate and defeated that I just decided to change the mechanic. I was like, what if the player bounces constantly? And that's the thing, they just bounce nonstop, and then they have to like watch their jump. And I was like, if I do that, I have to completely rework all the levels, and that's 20 levels worth of work that I don't really feel like redoing, because I feel like they're pretty good in their current state, but they just don't work with this mechanic. So once again, deleted it all, scrapped it, and I closed Construct out, and I just turned it off, man. I was done. I don't really know what it was, but instead of being depressed, I got really pissed off that this game and this code was kind of beating me. I got out of my bed angrily and I like threw open my laptop and I was like, you know what? I'm making this thing. So I went in and I was like, you know what? Let's go and find a YouTube video. There's got to be somebody that explains like good jumping code and I can just rip it or just take it and just, turn it into my own. Well, let me tell you, I found the perfect video of a guy showing coyote jumping and he showed exactly what I needed to do. It was exactly what I wanted to do. I took his code, altered it a little bit, and in 5 lines of code, I had a very precise jumping and movement system for my character, and it took me like 20 minutes to implement it. I couldn't believe it. I was ecstatic, but also furious at the fact that I almost let this beat me. Day 13 wasn't a very productive day for me. I think from the previous day, I was so distraught that I needed to take it kind of slow today. And that's what I did. And I think it was good for me. So I added in a boolean that is called has secret skin. You'll never guess what that does. And then I just fixed up some jank. There was a lot of little things that I needed to do. And as day 14 was approaching and I was really feeling the weight of having to finish this, I was like, okay, I gotta take this day to myself and then just hit it as hard as I can. But you know what? I needed the break. I genuinely needed the break. And with that, it was the last day of the challenge. My game was finished, not remotely close to where I wanted it, but it was a playable game with unlocks, collectibles, and a system to save progress. I'd done it. I had made a game. And it was a really startling realization to know that, 1, I had finished the challenge, but 2, I had actually made something that people can play. And that was crazy. That was really, really crazy for me to see that. So here I am, at the end of a 14-day challenge. I have a little 2D game. It's up on itch.io if you want to go play and see what it's about. And it was just so fun. Making a game was something that I had wanted to do for so long, and I had felt like I couldn't because I wasn't a good programmer, or I wasn't a good artist, or I just felt like I was inferior to anybody else who was making games, that if they did it, there was no way I could do it. This challenge not only proved to myself that I could do it, but it instilled in me a love for game development. There is something so just engaging about seeing something you've made moving or working or just interacting in front of you. And I just couldn't believe that I had done it. And if I can, good job, Dylan. And that is the story of Tiny Taps. It's up on itch.io if you want to go play it. And if you'd like to see more videos like this or more videos of me working on game development stuff, please let me know. And I'd love to do more. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day and go and play Tiny Taps. See if you can do it.